Hey, I'm Shaye Wanner, and you are listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Whether you're a seasoned rancher or just curious about the cattle world, this podcast dives into the stories, science, and strategies shaping the future of ranching. Let's get started and keep your herd ahead of the herd. Folks, Dr. Bob Weber is back for another podcast episode, and this time we are talking about an event that you should have on your radar to attend because it is going to cover some really important topics like producer profitability amidst conflicting market signals, beef on dairy, AI and machine learning related to the ranching industry, and sustainability. So, Bob is going to share and break down this event into more detail during our conversation today, and it's just going to help you get an idea of what you'll get out of attending. So before we begin, I will also want you to be sure to check out the Move Your Ranch Forward PDF on my website. It's a guided, goal-setting PDF designed specifically for ranchers like you. It is quick to complete and effective. Honestly, it's the one that I've been using for a few years, and that's why I'm now sharing it with you because I've seen how much it has helped us. So that link is in the show notes, but with that, let's visit with Dr. Weber.
Does tax season make you want to bang your head against the wall? Is billing a bad word in your household? Does meeting with your ag lender make your blood pressure rise? Stress a little less with cattle management software, Performance Beef. It tracks important feed, financial, and health data all in one system. The results? You can pull inventories, detailed financials, and invoices in minutes. Get ahead for next year's tax season. Visit performancelivestockanalytics.com to learn more.
All right. Well, Bob, good morning. It's great to have you back on the show. Last time I had you on, we said we shouldn't wait so long to do a podcast interview. So I guess a few months and the timing is right. And I'm excited to visit with you today about BIF Convention and what all is going to be happening and what ranchers can get out of attending. But since this is your second time back in the same calendar year, you get a little bit of a different question to start off with right away. And so kind of the harder hitting question would be, why should ranchers be encouraging the younger generation to come back to the ranch?
Oh, great question, Shaye. And thanks again, too, for having me. I really enjoyed our last conversation, so looking forward to this one. Your question is a good one. And I think one of the main reasons that older folks, older generation should be encouraging the younger generation to come back is I think we're in a really exciting time in the beef business, not from just a genetics and technology perspective, which is the space I work in a lot, but from a business opportunity standpoint. If we look at, particularly the last 2 or 3 years, returns for cow-calf producers have been pretty good. I think a much more exciting time to be in the cattle business than we've had in a long time, and certainly the generation I'm in, so I graduated high school in the late 80s, just came through the 80s farm crisis. The advice I got from home was go find a good job. And I think today the reality for a lot of young people, there is an opportunity for them to come back into the family business. It takes planning and entrepreneurship and some ideas on how to expand and diversify income streams, but really an exciting time. And for many folks, and your family's a great example of one that's got kind of a generational perspective. And so how do we move this business from the current generation to the next generation? And that takes a lot of work and dedication and commitment from both sides, right? The young and the old, to make that work and make the transition happen seamlessly. But I think, great opportunities for young folks coming into ag. People continue to eat, and the United States becomes and continues to be a great supplier of both food domestically, but also internationally. And I think that contributes a lot to our business opportunities.
Awesome. Well, I think you were right on with everything you said there. And I'm excited to be the next generation. And I always get excited when friends or even people a few years younger than me decide to go back sooner rather than later.
I'm reminded of the advice my dad gave. There's always room at the top for the people that are talented and work hard and have a good work ethic. And so, whether, young folks choose to enter the workforce and come back to the family farm or ranch or come straight there, talent and hard work pays off.
Absolutely. So today we are going to be talking about the BIF Convention and what all is going to be happening at that convention, kind of a little bit of a preview to put the bug in ranchers' ear. So to get started, I mean, I know I've been to convention once, but who is BIF? Let's maybe start there in case people aren't familiar.
Yep, so BIF is actually the acronym for the Beef Improvement Federation. So an industry trade organization that's made up principally, the member, it's truly a federation, so an organization of organizations. So the members per se are the breed associations, principally here in the United States and Canada, as well as the state and provincial beef cattle improvement associations. So, back in the founding of BIF in the late 1960s, 1968, in fact, was when BIF was established. There were active BCIAs in nearly every state that had a burgeoning seed stock and commercial cow-calf business. And BIF was originally founded to help standardize beef cattle performance data collection systems. So much of the early work was around how to, collect unbiased, reliable data and information for selection, and ultimately then, as time evolved, genetic evaluation systems, so helped standardize all that process. So one of the keystone products of BIF is the Uniform Guidelines for Beef Cattle Improvement, which short is the BIF guidelines, available now in wiki format. It used to be, a print publication that was sort of the main songbook for producers and breed associations to use in standardization of genetic evaluation systems and data collection. One of the other kind of hallmark features of BIF is an annual research and educational symposium. So annually, typically in the summer, May, June, or July, we have an annual 3-day conference that moves around the United States and is designed to really highlight both new research and ongoing work in genetic improvement in beef cattle. Been for a long time the must-attend meeting for thought leaders in the genetic evaluation space. So that includes, of course, leading seed stock producers, a key part of that audience, in fact probably the largest single contingent of attendees. But we also draw beef cattle researchers from research institutions, land-grant universities, USDA Meat Animal Research Center, for example, always attendees as well, extension educators from across the country, allied industry folks, so both seed stock organization technical staff and leadership, as well as AI stud folks that are involved in data collection, data evaluation, and so forth. So it ends up being, I call it the who's who of beef cattle genetic improvement. And two really key components of the meeting are great technical content and great networking opportunity for producers. And we try and foster this. The hall talk is a really important aspect of the meeting. It's not just come and sit in a lecture hall for 2 days. It's get challenged with new ideas and then have conversations with people that are of similar mindset, for lack of a better term, synthesize the new information into our mental context and constructs and sort of help define the future of genetic evaluation in beef cattle. So it's a great organization and really a must-attend, I think, event for many of us that work in the industry, and we're hopeful that we continue to draw some new folks in. I know, Shaye, I think in our last conversation you mentioned maybe the meeting in South Dakota, is that right? Was the one that you attended?
I went to the Brookings one that must have been summer of 19.
I think that's right, yep. Yeah, I think I've only since about 1994 or 95 only missed 2. And so they kind of blur together a little bit in my head now and trying to keep straight which one's which. But I remember the locations. I just have a hard time getting them in the right chronology, right? So, yeah, but that was a great meeting. So, and I'm curious, what, as a first-time attendee, what were your big takeaways about organization and event? And then if you remember some of the technical content from that year, I'd have to go look at the program to remember all of it. But
yeah, so I had just finished my first year of college when I went to that. I think you had like the Young Producer Symposium kind of the first day. Is that correct?
Yep, first afternoon. Yep.
Right. So one of my professors, Dr. Field, was talking at that. And this was, right before I was starting my podcast. And he was encouraging me on my entrepreneurial journey. And he was like, Shaye, you're a rancher. You want to do something in the rancher space. BIF is in Brookings. It's 4 hours from you. Just go. And my sister was also going. So it was, easy for me because I knew someone else there. Sometimes I think that's the challenging part with any convention is it's nice just to know one other person, is going to be there. But then I showed up and I actually knew a lot of people there. There were a lot of people there that I knew and was able to talk to. And just like you already brought up, the networking component was really cool and neat, especially because it wasn't just ranchers. Like you said, there were some very forward-thinking producers. There were a lot of forward-thinking researchers, a lot of forward-thinking people from the breed associations, supporting industries and businesses. And the content was really interesting to me, but the hallway conversations and being able to even listen to just kind of bits and pieces of those or have some of them myself about the topics that were discussed was really valuable. And it just kind of opens your mind and gets you really excited about the beef industry and all the improvements that are coming down the chain.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear. I think one of the areas that we've tried to work on organizationally over the last decade, really, it started in the meeting in Biloxi, Mississippi. It was the first year we had the Young Producer Symposium. And one of the things that we observed at BIF was that, grandma and grandpa and mom and dad from these generational operations would come to the BIF meeting. And the next generation that's, trying to be engaged in the business, they got to stay home and, for a lot of folks still maybe breeding cows, getting ready to put up hay, all that kind of stuff. So lots of labor requirement at home. The younger folks stayed home to do that stuff. And so we tried to think of a way to attract young people to the meeting and get them connected and networked and mentored, if you will, with the thought leaders that attend BIF. And that's actually how the Young Producer Symposium was spawned, as an idea to get those groups of people together and face to face. Many find that, when they get there, they think, well, I'm going to be one, it's going to be, I'll be over my head. And that's not true. There's challenging stuff, right? Even for, a seasoned veteran, if you will, like me, we try and build the program so it pushes everybody ahead, right? It's not a, EPD's 101 kind of discussion. It's, how do we push the edge? How do we transform our thinking and our businesses and systems to be better? And so we try and build the content that way. And I think for many folks, they come and they go, whoa, right? Their hair's straight back. But if they come the second year and continue to grow and push into the space, right, they get cultured up and trained up, and that's a really important bit. We've had great luck with the Young Producer Symposium, getting a younger audience to the meeting that really has, I think, inspired a lot of our more seasoned folks to think differently, particularly in the technology space. The young people pick up the technology and they're engaged in a lot of stuff. Us older folks, like my youngest son came to me yesterday. He's got a dirt bike, and he's like, I needed some information. He was working on some aspect of the bike. I don't know anything about motorcycles. I'm pretty mechanical, but I don't know anything about motorcycles. And he's like, yeah, I needed a torque spec for the rear hub on this bike. And so I just asked Chat GPT how to do this, and it came up with a whole step-by-step list with torque specs, the whole 9 yards. I'm like, dude, you don't even have a torque wrench, right? But
Support your cattle's health and productivity with Vigortone minerals. Since 1912, Vigortone has been a trusted name in animal nutrition. The revitalized product line offers targeted nutrition for every stage of production and every region. Vigortone delivers consistent performance and simplifies your mineral decisions. Wherever you are, Vigortone works. Visit vigortone.com to learn more, and that link is also in the show notes. So I think I want to hear a little bit more about what you kind of have in store for that Young Producer Symposium, since I know a lot of people listening to this podcast would fall into that area. So even if they can only, get away from the ranch for a day or a day and a half, I mean, they're going to get a lot of value just out of that part of the event. If they go that part of the day and the next generation comes the next few days, sometimes I know my parents kind of split up like that for some state cattlemen stuff every now and then. So let's talk about that Young Producer Symposium and what you have planned.
Yeah, so the other part of Young Producer Symposium that I think gets a fair bit of attention is it's almost always not genetics topics, right? So it's, transition planning, entrepreneurship, leadership and training, those sort of things. And in fact, that's one of the aspects that draws in a fair number of our more seasoned folks into the space is that it's not the genetic stuff. It's a lot of the other stuff. And so you mentioned Dr. Tom Field. Tom was also one of my mentors growing up and through college. He was actually my undergraduate advisor. And I did my master's degree with Tom there at CSU, who incidentally, the CSU Rams, 1 point would have made the Sweet 16. Well, they need 2 points to win. 1 to tie, 2 to win last night in the NCAA. So a little bit of a heartbreaker for our Rams. But often think about the days back at CSU and working with Dr. Field. And this kind of space is right up his alley. And he's agreed to serve as the MC and moderator for our Young Producer Symposium this year. As you well know, he's an Engler program director there at the University of Nebraska. And incidentally, a strong Engler connection here at West Texas A&M, our host institution in Texas for this year's BIF. So a really nice sort of cross-pollination, if you will, of Engler influence at the meeting. So Tom's going to start off with some motivational and entrepreneurship comments, and then serve as MC for the afternoon session. We have planned a ag law attorney to join us to talk about transition planning. Tiffany Lashmet is a JD, an attorney, works for Texas AgriLife Extension, and originally from, if I remember right, East Central New Mexico, and has her own family transition story to help share, but works a lot in strategies for transition planning. And so we asked her to come and talk about that set of dialogues and kind of relationship management, if you will, from the young person side, right? So we get oftentimes in Extension a fair bit of how coaching landowners and business owners how to transition to the younger generation, but from that perspective, we thought maybe helpful for young folks to get coached up on how do I manage that relationship from the other side. So, how do I engage with my parents or grandparents or other business owners to help facilitate that transition? So that one will be a great one. The next piece is sort of along the sort of family business and culture. Trevor Cavanis from Cavanis Packing, which is a family-owned business, has an outstanding reputation for workplace satisfaction, which is, you think about a packing business as maybe not a spot where, everything's just peace and love and joy, right? But they do have a great reputation for employee retention and employee management. So Trevor's going to come and speak to the topic of leaving a legacy, building and growing a great corporate culture in a family business, which I think, again, from the young person's perspective, we can be positive influences into those whole set of dialogues around the ongoing management of our business, and having the right perspective can be really, really helpful in that. Then after the break sessions, 2 sets of speakers kind of change gears just a little bit. I should mention the theme for this year's Young Producer Symposium is making your, in parentheses, young voice heard, advocacy, and transition planning. So all around this idea of, at the core of it, communication, but also some entrepreneurship and transition planning work. So the after break session is going to be a panel discussion actually on advocacy, and moderated by Matt Perrier. So Matt hosts a podcast as well called Practically Ranching, and is a former BIF board member and president of the BIF board. So Matt's going to kind of lead that discussion, and much like you, has a really interesting podcast, tackles a whole range of topics related to the cattle and ranching communities. Does a great job. So we've worked with him to identify a few other young folks that are in the social media space, so not just podcasting, but other, TikTok, all that kind of stuff. So we're getting confirmation from a couple of those too, and we'll highlight that as we get closer to the event. But a session around kind of social media and telling your story as a young person. Then the last speaker before our opening recession. Let's hope we don't have an opening recession. Opening recession is Grady Bishop. So Grady's vice president for global marketing at Vitelli. So of course they're a business that has technology at their core, both in IVF and in animal performance data collection systems. But Grady's got a great background in sort of corporate training and in leadership. And so he's going to talk to the topic of professional development, a guide to building your professional network and mentor relationships. So we thought maybe one of the things, and we observed this a little bit in the last couple of years, you know, new young people, and Shaye, I'll ask you, what do they do when they get to a meeting and they don't know anybody?
It's pretty easy to go stand in the corner by yourself.
Or self-aggregate with the other young people, right? Which is okay. But we thought, well, maybe we ought to have like a little session on how do you build this mentor-mentee relationship as a young person? How do you get the most out of one of these meetings? So, of course, we hope people come and, you know, take in the informational content. But because of BIF's rich history in the value of the hall talk, go get engaged in the hall talk, right? There's some of this advice is really good advice for the older generation too, right? You know, when I get there, Matt Spangler and I go hang out a lot, right? Well, I know Matt really well, and we share a lot of great ideas, but what we ought to do is go and have that conversation with, you know, like 5 new people that we don't know, right? And so there'll be some great advice for us on how to, you know, kind of build that networking relationship, you know, how to go to a meeting and be prepared to have the 2-minute conversations, you know, while you're standing in line for a cocktail, right? You know, have a set of questions about, you know, what are you interested in at the meeting? What brought you here? What topic's most interesting to you? We have a tendency to talk about, you know, where are you from and what's the weather like at home, which aren't unimportant things, right? But, you know, having some engagement relative to the conference you're at helps build those relationships out. So hopefully some really practical and tactical things we can all use to get more content and more advantage from investing in a meeting. Because at the end of the day, you know, we have, you know, 3 days of programming. You know, people will spend, you know, probably $1,500 a piece to get there, and, you know, hotel and all the stuff. How do you leverage that investment and get a good return on it? So that's the opening Young Producers kind of recap. So,
Well, that is pretty cool. It sounds like you've got a lot going on with that Young Producer Symposium, especially as the opener, and I really like that theme. And I'm really thinking about how I can get to Amarillo to get there this year. It's not a great time for me, but I might have to move some things around. So that is really cool. So that's the Young Producer Symposium. And I mean, like you said, that, you know, designed for young producers, but something that all attendees can get some value out of. But I want to hear a little bit more. Tell me a little bit more about some of the other, just the topics that are going to be discussed the rest of the week.
Yep. So we're kind of back to kind of our traditional BIF schedule. I know a couple of years ago in Canada, we kind of, because of some logistics of off-site stuff, we kind of inverted the schedule a little bit. But we're back to the typical BIF schedule. So the 2 full days of meetings are structured with general sessions in the morning, so the whole audience together. For morning session, awards luncheon, and then afternoon breakout sessions. So we have 6 standing committees at BIF, and so we'll have 3 of those concurrent each afternoon. So the 2 days, the general skeleton looks the same, topics different, of course. So the first general session this year kind of continues a little bit of a discussion that we started last year in Knoxville. That meeting was really focused around kind of maternal orientation and how do we build better beef cows, both at the seed stock and commercial segments, as kind of general themes. This year's general session 1's theme is beef industry profitability, conflicting market signals and profit drivers in the beef value chain. And then sort of in parentheses, what role does the breeding system and animal selection play in adding value to the beef chain? And so one of the sort of challenges that our commercial and seed stock producers face is that, you know, depending on what segment you're in, the market signals are different and the things that influence profitability are different and sometimes, you know, conflicting. So as an example, we know that, you know, beef carcasses continue to get bigger and bigger, and we're in record territory for large beef carcasses, partially stimulated by the contraction in inventory. So we're trying to manage beef supply just by making them bigger. Well, there's genetic consequence to that, to the kinds of cows that we have, and most cow-calf producers would argue probably we don't want cows bigger. We'd probably like to moderate them some. And those 2 things genetically are sort of juxtaposed. And so we want to have a dialogue about that and try and figure out how do we manage that from a selection and management standpoint. So Dr. Field would be happy, given his predilection towards understanding consumer and consumer behavior. We're going to start with the consumer. So Dr. Mandy Carr, Senior Executive Director, Scientific Affairs at NCBA, is going to lead off the discussion and talk about today's beef consumer, who they are, what do they say, and what do they want. So both around sort of product attributes in terms of the physical beef product that we produce, but also the production system that goes with that. So some discussion about sustainability and animal welfare concepts. All of those things play a role in the acceptance and value determination of our product. So Dr. Carr is going to tackle that. Of course, we are in the Texas Panhandle, so kind of the heart of South Plains cattle feeding area. So beef packing, cattle feedlot, of course, large cow-calf operations in that part of the world too. So a great sort of nexus of all these interacting pieces of the beef business. And so we're going to have Dr. Ty Lawrence he's a professor at West Texas A&M, has been involved in carcass data collection and evaluation for a long time, talk about feedlot and packing system profit drivers. So an overview of the far end of the beef chain, so kind of working stepwise backwards through the system to understand what those market drivers are. I think oftentimes as cow-calf producers, we have a tendency to think very narrowly about our business without stepping back and thinking a lot about the consequences of the decisions we make down chain and vice versa, right? So the far end of the chain sometimes I don't think gives a lot of credence or spends a lot of time trying to understand the motivation and direction of the cow-calf producer. So we're trying to facilitate that dialogue a little bit. So Dr. Lawrence is going to cover feedlot and packing. As we sort of transition through the rest of that morning program, discussion around the cow-calf side, so understanding some of the nuances and challenges we face in the cow-calf sector and the decisions for and pressure for increased growth and carcass performance. The last segment that morning then, real quickly here, is just a look at beef on dairy. So that part of the world also has a large dairy cow population, both fluid and cheese factory, fluid milk and cheese production in that part of the world. And beef on dairy, of course, is taking the world by storm. And so a little bit of a discussion about how do we tailor and select for ideal genetics to work on Holstein and Jersey cows, because it turns out, not surprisingly, that the best bulls for value add on a Jersey or Holstein cows aren't exactly the same bulls that we might use on native beef cows to build high value carcasses. So kind of a panel discussion to work through that. And so it should be a really great discussion kind of around those challenges of profitability in the beef chain. The second day's general session takes on a little more technology, sustainability kind of focus. It's a little bit of a smorgasbord, but kind of all under the title of sustainability, improving our product through selection and applications of data and technology integration. So I think, even politically, I know sustainability and environmental stuff is kind of in the crosshairs at the moment, but I think from an industry perspective, our consumer thinks those things are important, so we should think those things are important. It's still going to matter. I take the view, particularly around, some of the greenhouse gas stuff. I look at it as, well, how do we get cow-calf producers and seed stock producers interested in that topic? And, I look at it as resource management, right? So methane turns out to be energy loss or an energy sink in our system. And I think about, well, how much better off would a beef cow be if she kept, 6 to 10% of the energy she consumes and uses it internally, right? Her metabolic function versus losing that energy into the atmosphere. And so obviously production efficiency and productivity consequences from that. And so I think it's important that we continue to have these dialogues. And so does the BIF board. And so we put together this program actually last fall before a whole bunch of this other stuff kind of blew up. But I think still a really timely and important discussion to have, both from a domestic perspective, but also an international one. And so our leadoff speaker in that session is going to be Dr. Matt Cleveland. Matt's Senior Director for Global Bovine Sustainability. So he has both beef and dairy responsibilities globally for ABS Global, and does an outstanding job of talking about this particular topic. And so he's going to address global and domestic perspectives on beef sustainability innovation for a more sustainable food supply. So I think does a great job of connecting the dots between genetic improvement in these phenotypes and traits that are important for sustainability and why we should go after them. So Matt does a fantastic job. I've seen him a number of times speak to, I won't say non-ag audiences because they're, Sustainable Ag Summit was one of the spots, but largely a group of, food system folks from further down the chain, and does a great job telling our story from the beef cattle space. Second speaker, Dr. Guilherme Rosa. He's precision livestock production and breeding faculty at the University of Wisconsin. So an animal breeder by training, but doing some really great work in the use of artificial intelligence. So the other AI, right? Artificial intelligence and machine learning in animal improvement. So how do we use these new technologies to both enable genetic evaluation systems, but also automated phenotyping. So doing work using visual analysis, video analysis to collect phenotypes and automate phenotypic record collection for our systems, particularly along some of the behavior and welfare traits. Really, really great work. So Dr. Rosa will do a fantastic job. Then third speaker in that series, Dr. Jason Archer. He's head of genetics for Beef and Lamb New Zealand, so an industry group focused on genetic improvement in the beef and lamb space. He's going to speak to global perspectives on greenhouse gas emissions from the beef sector, opportunities and pitfalls. So New Zealand has been, I'd say, at the very front bloody edge of GHG mitigation and emissions policy. And for a while, and I think this is still the case, they're on the books of a net zero emissions from the livestock sectors, and which is a huge challenge. And so Jason's been thinking through that strategy and living through it and working in New Zealand. So he's going to share what he's learned in that space with us. And I think they're a ways ahead or further down the pipe than we are here in the States, and so should provide some great perspective. Jason's also a frequent BIF attendee, so he knows a lot about our audience and the community that we work in. The last speaker, Ben Weinheimer, CEO, Texas Cattle Feeders Association, should have an honorable PhD, really a smart guy and does a great job also communicating in the sustainability space. So he's going to talk to economics of sustainability decisions and strategies for the U.S. beef value chain. And as the exec at TCFA, he's also on the board for the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and really engaged in that dialogue, and I think does a great job of communicating some of the economic reasons that we need to be engaged as an industry in these dialogues and put the practices into play. So it should be a great couple of days there of general session programming. And then, I mentioned earlier, our afternoons are filled with breakout sessions. So a number of these speakers will also get pulled into an afternoon session that sort of continues to evolve one of those topics.
Yeah. I think if you talk to a lot of people, the breakout sessions are sometimes their favorite ones because you can get a few more smaller conversations or just go more in depth about the topics that interest you most. So,
calling all ranchers. If you are looking for a better way to optimize your grazing operation and rev up your bottom line, Noble Research Institute can help. Noble's team of ranch managers and researchers work together to find solutions to your challenges. They don't just give you answers, they can help you understand how to apply their research-tested and field-proven principles on your ranch. Visit noble.org to learn more and browse Noble's educational resources.
All really interesting stuff. I mean, the conflicting market signals, that's something that briefly got brought up in my conversation with Dr. Lallman a few months ago, because he came on the podcast to talk about cow size. And so that was a really interesting conversation. If people have not listened to it, he's been on my podcast, and you brought up Matt Perrier. He was also on Matt's podcast as well, talking about it. Another great conversation. So something maybe for people to go back to. But yeah, the conflicting market signals, that's really interesting. And then this tech and sustainability, a lot of interesting topics and maybe some new perspectives or takes on it than what's been being talked about on the regular throughout the industry. So I think that's really valuable. Question about, the AI machine learning on the phenotype side. How do you see that impacting what ranchers do? That's a really new topic in the beef cattle space, I feel like.
Yeah, I think sort of two layers of it. One of them is the genetic evaluation, genetic analysis space. So there's a whole set of analytical methods that we can employ to, aid our decision making from, the ultimate question of, who's the best parent. All right. So a statistical approach, which that's kind of abstracted, that's a discussion that, academics like Matt Spengler and I try and have and others, but there's going to be an impact of that, technology because the computational ability of, AI systems is massive. And so lets us deploy some analytical models that we've previously not been able to use because of computational limitations. I think the other part is really the automation of phenotype collection. So we can think about, in fact, there was a young lady at the BIF meeting in Knoxville last year that was working on a prototype AI system to do foot scoring. She was working principally in dairy cattle, but to collect, objective measurements of foot and leg scores on cattle, which, I've worked in that space, and it is a really challenging one to get producers engaged in because many of them don't have a high degree of confidence in their ability to look at one and go, okay, that one's a 50 versus that one's a 60, right? And so the AI software does the video image analysis and uses the landmarks and actually calculates a number for all the stuff, right?
Well, that's kind of what I was wondering because in college I had friends who would look at pictures and videos of pig feet, kind of, looking structurally at that. So I was wondering if, maybe that's kind of the route or it was kind of finally trickling down to beef on the foot and leg structure side of things.
Yeah, and so those systems, and I know Mark Goes, a producer in Nebraska, is working on a similar idea to do feet and leg scoring in beef cattle, and one takes labor out, right? So it makes the system automated, passive, if you will, in terms of record collection on something that's arguably maybe the computer system at least does it with less bias, hopefully, than we might apply and maybe more consistent application. But those AI systems are great at if you can identify either mathematically, so you can calculate, pasture and angle, right? So you can figure out how to tell the computer to do that, or comparison between this image and another image, which one's the most alike, those kinds of technologies. I know there's some work being done in dairy cattle to use basically an image captured from a kind of above and behind the animal to calculate body condition scoring. Again, a really important phenotype that many, particularly beef producers, find challenging to collect, just being able to discern what's the difference between a 5 and a 6, right? And without some training and practice, people don't feel real comfortable doing that. And then when they know that it's going into the genetic evaluation system, they kind of get a little stressed out about it. And so the AI can be very helpful there. Other things is, collecting automated weights, right? So, designing a system to capture body weights on cows on pasture and monitor body weight change during the growing or lactation period for, cows rearing calves, all animal health stuff, right? So being able to detect differences in health status, grazing behavior, there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's a pretty interesting space, if you will, that's, got lots of new entrants, lots of new ideas, which is healthy for us.
Well, just the ability to maybe take some of that bias out is going to be really interesting because even, how my dad would score feet and legs might be slightly different than what my mom would call it, would be different than what I would call it, or maybe slightly different than my sister would. And, what I call it one day, the next day, it might be a little different. So it's just hard to be consistent.
Inter and intra observer error, right?
Now, is there going to be a tour again this year?
Yes, actually, there's going to be 2 tours. So the host folks, Dr. David Lust is the department head at WT's, help him coordinate those. One of them is kind of more of a kind of range cow-calf seed stock one that goes north and east of Amarillo. And then there's another one that goes towards Hereford, Texas, that's got packing, feedlot, beef on dairy focus. So kind of 2 different twists, but both connected obviously to our program and great opportunities. So we'll have 2 coach buses and then some opportunity for additional transportation for folks that want to take take that in. I haven't been on the tours for quite a while. It becomes a kind of a long trip for all the BIF staff. But I went last year on the tour in Tennessee, and my big challenge, I'm committed to going one of the tours in Texas this year. Now the challenge is I have to decide which one. Tour is a lot of fun though. It's great. Another one, you're sitting on a bus, and we try and, half hour, 40 minutes maximum drive between stops if we can. But in that period of time, great opportunity to learn. So we'll have some speakers on the bus, but also some quiet time where you can, talk to the person sitting next to you across the aisle and, help synthesize what we've seen and heard over the last few days.
Yeah. So remind everyone the dates and where and how people can register.
Absolutely. So we are June 10th through 13th. So the Young Producer Conference is opening event at 1 o'clock on the 10th, and then 2 full days on the 11th and 12th, and then the tour, which is an additional registration item, on the 13th. So 10th through 13th, headquartered in Amarillo. So we'll work out of the Civic Center in Amarillo, is kind of the host facility meeting site, where we'll have the general session and Young Producer Symposium and luncheons and so forth. We do have an evening event planned in Canyon at WT's campus, a beautiful facility there. We'll take part in a dinner event there and Shark Tank and some scholarship presentations on Wednesday the 11th. And headquarters hotel is the Embassy Suites there, which is immediately across the street adjacent to the convention center. So real convenient location for everybody. Short either rental car or Uber ride from the Amarillo airport to downtown. It should be a great venue. For folks that are interested in seeing the kind of full-blown, we've recapped a whole bunch of it, but seeing the program in print, if you will, go to bifsymposium.com is our conference website, so bifsymposium.com. And at that site, you can find the program as well as our hotel lodging portal. So there'll be 3 hotel options for attendees. Again, the Embassy Suites is the headquarters right across the street. And also, conference registration is online as well. And we'll have all of those up and running here about April 1st for lodging and registration. So.
Awesome. Well, if there is one reason ranchers should attend this event, what's that one reason?
Oh boy, just limit it to one. I would say connectivity, right? So one of the things, I found this as I was working at the Gelfie Association back in the mid 90s, so my first job out of college. One of the first events I went to was BIF. And the connections I made there, of course I kept going and going and going and going, but are people I run into all the time, both as producers and other academics, extension folks, allied industry people. If you want to get connected to beef cattle genetic improvement, BIF is the must-attend meeting.
Absolutely. Well, Bob, thank you for joining me for another conversation today. I will be sure to include some of those links in the show notes for people who are interested. And if anyone has questions, I've only attended once, but you can reach out to me, or I'm sure you can reach out to Bob too, or there's information on the website. So be sure to take it into consideration this summer and try to attend if you can.
Thanks, Shaye. We hope lots of new faces attend as well as all the regulars. It should be a great meeting in Amarillo. We try and work really hard to keep this a real reasonable cost event. And so we'll have a fair bit of kind of regional and local attendees. But, for those of you traveling a ways, if you come from North Dakota, we work really hard with our sponsors to help keep the cost really reasonable for this meeting, and know, the value propositions is pretty favorable. So we hope lots of folks attend.
All right. Well, folks, remember to share this podcast with someone else who might find it interesting, because that's the best way to help not only this podcast, but other podcasts grow. And happy ranching.